manager. That place was my meal ticket, so I ran a tight ship. And if you ask me, we had the best bar in South Tacoma. Well, it turns out someone else thought so too, and that someone ended up making me a job offer I couldn't refuse. It's not there anymore, but there was this restaurant in South Lake Union called Gastropod. And the guy I served drinks to that night was the owner, and he wanted me to be the place's new general manager once the current one turned over his keys at the end of the month. And he was willing to pay me very handsomely for my services. I said thank you and goodbye to the old crew, moved up to Seattle towards the end of the month, and then spent the next few works getting over the imposter syndrome as I settled into my new role. Now I love my job, but the best thing about moving up to Seattle by far was my new apartment. Aside from the steep rent, there was basically no downsides to living there. It was a really nice neighborhood, and when I say it was quiet, I mean it was crazy just how peaceful it was. And that was in no small part down to my roommate, named Adam. And Adam was, in a word, a ghost. It actually took a whole 3 weeks after moving in before I met him, and I tried knocking on his door down in the lobby a whole 3 times and got no answer every single time. I was just getting home from work around 11:30 at night when I ran into Adam in the lobby while he was headed out. And the dude looked legitimately spooked to see me at first, and then even after I introduced myself as his new neighbor, he didn't seem to warm up at all. He wasn't rude really, just anxious. And after he said he worked in tech, I invited him up for a beer sometime, and he replied very nervously saying, "Yeah, sure, maybe," in a way that suggested that he was never going to do that. But hey, there are worse things than a quiet roommate, right? So I wasn't really complaining. And I lived in Seattle for a whole 6 months without anything to complain about, besides the rain, of course. Until one day, when my awesome brand new life turned into a complete nightmare. It started towards the end of March 2007. I finished up at work, said goodbye to everyone, and locked up for the night, and then as I was walking along waiting for a vacant cab to appear, a black sedan with tinted windows rolled up next to me. I could spend like a paragraph or two describing the guy who appeared in the open back window, but nothing really sums him up better than Fat Bill Burr. He was bald like Bill, he talked like Bill, and he even laughed like Bill, and the only difference was the guy in the back seat must have had at least 60 pounds on him. In this loud Boston accent, he says to me, "Hey buddy, how's it going?" I told him fine, that I was on my way home, and then he says, "Well, why don't you jump in? I'll give you a ride." I told the guy that I'd rather wait for a cab, and then he responds, "You're the manager of that gastropod place, right?" When I said yes, he told me that that was what he wanted to talk to me about, and if I got into his car and went for a ride with him, I might just find myself looking at a very lucrative money-making opportunity, both for me and the restaurant. I hesitated, but he gave me this look and said, Come on. What do you think I'm gonna do? Just get in, and even if it's a no on what I gotta say, you got yourself a free ride home." Now, I wasn't some nerd incapable of defending myself, so I got in, and we took off, and I listened to what he had to say. But from the moment he started talking, I knew that I'd made a huge mistake. Now, the first thing he said was basically, "Alright, I'm gonna come clean. I don't give a crap about your crummy job, but you're in the car now, so shut up and listen." The guy's demeanor shifted completely after I got in the car, and I can't lie. It definitely made me a little nervous when he forcibly told me to shut up. And it wasn't just him and a driver either. There was a guy in the passenger seat looking around and very much mean-mugging me. And the guy started off by saying that since he knew where I lived and he knew where I worked, we'd be seeing plenty of each other in the future. And there was no point hiding or any of that crap, as he put it. But if I kept cool and did my job, then, like he said, there was money in it for me. All I had to do was find a way of getting into my roommate's part of the house so I could look for something for him. It was real small, and so small that he might be able to hide it in some pretty creative places, so I'd have to look long and hard if I wanted to find it. But when I did find it, the guy didn't want me to take it. He just wanted me to let him know that it was there and, more importantly, where it was being hidden. Now, I remember kind of reflexively saying, "I can't do that," to which he responded that not only could I do what he asked, but I would. He said I didn't look stupid, so he knew I'd do the right thing and do as he asked. I asked what would happen if I didn't, and the implications were clear. He said I'd recognize the thing he wanted me to find from the letters D-FNTL written on it. I didn't have to memorize it though. I don't even think it was those exact letters either, to be honest, but it'd be the only thing in his place with those letters on it, and then when I found it, all I had to do was tell him it was there. He left a kind of pause, waiting for me to say something, but all I could bring myself to ask was if he was, like, with the CIA or the FBI or something. The guy laughed and then told me if he was, he'd just arrest me and throw my ass in a cell, then threaten me with prison time till I cooperated. But since he wasn't, since he was a nice guy, as he put it, he was going to pay me to do it instead. On the other hand, he could make a phone call to some associates of his who'd head over to my place in the middle of the night and beat the location of the object out of my roommate. But he knew that it'd be noisy and messy and have the cops crawling around, and since I probably had my own stuff going on, I most likely didn't want that. Just to make it clear, I did not have my own stuff going on, and I'd have been more than happy to have gotten the cops involved there and then. But he had that whole thing covered with the next part of his little speech. He said the cops in Seattle were dumb and couldn't run a goddamn bath, let alone a city. And they were also more corrupt than an NBA ref, at least according to him anyway, and so if I talked to them and made any kind of report about him or what was going on with my roommate, he'd know, and there'd be trouble. Now by this point, I'm just a complete mess in my head, and all my energy was going towards not showing that. My head was spinning, I can feel myself sweating, and at one point I was legitimately thinking, this can't be happening. I passed out on the pavement and this freaking fever dream is occurring right now. But it wasn't. What was occurring to me in that moment was real, and there was no getting out of it. The guy even picked up on how scared I was after he directed his driver to take me home, and he started saying how I didn't have to worry about a thing if I just did as he told me. And there was no time limit on it either, since my priority was almost not alerting my roommate that I was going through his stuff. And the guy said if I spooked him, he might leave, and I really didn't want him to do that. If I did, he might leave and take that little object with him, which was something he would not allow to happen. I tried once again to tell him that I wasn't right for the job, that I'd mess it up and he should just find someone more professional. Now he responded with a pee-wee baseball coach saying stuff like, "Sure you can, kid. You're his roomie. I'm sure he trusts you." And he added that Adam, the name of my roommate there, might even have the object that I was looking for lying around on a coffee table or something. All I needed to do was head down there with a six-pack while the game was on and take a little look around after asking him to use the bathroom. I remember telling the man that Adam wasn't that kind of person, but he only said, "I'm sure you'll think of something, kid. You'll see." And a few minutes later, the guy was dropping me off a block over from my place, saying he'd be in touch the following week. I got out, just feeling numb as I walked back to my place, and then I spent the next few hours wondering what in God's name I was going to do. I tried asking the guy his name before I got out. I tried asking who they were with, too. I got answers to neither, and the guy just said, "It's not important." And then after asking me not to slam his door too hard, he and his boys took off into the night. I didn't even try to memorize the license plate because I believe every word of what he said about the cops, and even if he didn't have anyone on his payroll, they wouldn't be able to protect me from him, not in the short term anyway. And so really, what choice did I have other than to do what that weirdo said? And so I spent the next couple of days fixating on two things. Firstly, I wondered how the heck I was going to get into Adam's place without alerting him, and secondly, I wondered who the hell he was to have landed himself in so much trouble. All I knew was that he was anemic looking, worked in tech, and liked to stay out all night. And then if he was just some nerd, why not snatch him off the street, kind of like they did with me, and then get what they wanted that way? And if it was that important, why not just kick his door down in the middle of the night? Why get me involved? Was Adam dangerous, and if so, how? Those are all of the thoughts that were running through my head over the next week or so, and since I didn't know the first thing about robbery or burglary, I figured my best chance was to sort of fake a break-in. I could make it look like something it wasn't, and if the little labeled object I was looking for didn't move, then maybe he wouldn't take off with it. And I was still toying with that idea the next time I ran into the man in the black sedan. Now, I was walking to my car after work when I spotted his car, and while I'd been just about flinching at anything that looked like it for the past week, this was the real deal. The back door swung open, and I heard that same Bill Burr Boston accent say, "Hey buddy, what do you say we have ourselves a little talk?" I thought about running, but I knew that'd just piss him off, and so I climbed into the back seat with him and we had ourselves that little talk. At first, he asked me how things were going, if I'd made any moves yet, stuff like that, and I was honest with him. I told him I was still in the planning stages, that I was pretty inexperienced with things like that, and that he'd have to give me more time, a lot more time to get it done. And the guy kind of nodded, but added that he didn't have all the time in the world, so I should start making moves now. And that's when the second part happened, the scary part, because when I once again suggested that I wasn't the right guy for the job because I didn't have the moves he was referring to, and I was sure that I'd messed things up, the guy asked me, "So how's Annie doing?" Now the question had the color draining from my face. I literally felt lightheaded when he said it, like a damned bobblehead just trying to keep my head pointed the right way up. My heart started beating faster. I got that cold, sweaty feeling all over again, and try as I might, but I couldn't stop my hands from shaking, because Annie was my grandmother's name. Now, I didn't act like some tough guy. I didn't tell him if you ever lay a finger on her or anything like that. And I was just too stunned to speak, and I stayed too stunned until the guy reassured me that she wasn't in danger. He just wanted to know how she was doing. I didn't answer him. I just told him I'd have the job done by that time next week. And that's when the third portion of our conversation commenced, and he gave me a little advice. He told me to case the place, familiarize myself with it, and to do it soon. The guy then smiled, asked me not to slam his door again, and that marked the end of our second meeting. I thought about what he said about casing the place, which, for those who don't know, is basically the word criminals use for recon or scouting out or looking around. Getting a look at the place before I actually look for the thing would give me an idea of where everything was and where I most likely needed to look. And so, as strange as it might sound, I tried the idea I originally dismissed and showed up at Adam's door with a 6-pack of beer, some energy drinks, and 2 boxes of that chef's choice sushi. I figured I could pass the whole thing off as a sort of thanks for being a cool neighbor gift, so even if he didn't drink, I could talk my way inside with that good sushi that I brought. But even so, getting inside was no easy task. When I knocked on his door, Adam obviously didn't seem too excited on letting me inside. A few weeks back, I'd have put that all on him being nothing more than shy, an anxious person maybe, but right then, I knew there was something bigger going on. That didn't stop me from keeping my cool, and I guess that was down to me not having to pretend to be interested in him. I'd been wondering about what he did, how he lived, and what his part of the house looked like for months by that point, and so I didn't have to put on some Oscar-winning performance to make that believable for him. I only really sold the idea of me coming inside by saying I'd basically never ask him again. All I wanted to do was get a feel for my not-so-new roomie, and then I'd leave him in peace like I usually did. He still didn't want to, and that much was obvious, but he knew that accepting my offer meant that I'd leave him alone in the long run, so he invited me inside. Adam's place was spotless. The decor was minimal and monochrome, and he didn't have a television that I could even see, and he had those 2 huge bookcases filled to bursting with all kinds of computer and tech-centric books. And after he put the sushi in his refrigerator, he showed me around a little, not saying all that much, but just trying to be polite, I guess. Now, I started asking about his job, and he said he worked mostly from home, but when I asked to see his setup, he lost what little of the friendliness he had about him and just said no. I tried to play it off like I was just being curious. I wasn't set on and expecting every nook and cranny, even though I was. But then, as I carried on getting vague non-answers to my questions about his job, I was looking around the room and seeing a lot of security cameras. I saw a lot. There were 3 of them set up around the living space and kitchen, all pretty sleek and small ones too. But that was 3 more than I had, and seeing as they made my job that little bit harder, I couldn't help but ask about them. Now, I turned it into a little joke, I suppose, asking if he was just paranoid or I needed that kind of equipment for my own part of the house. Adam just kind of looked at me, like he couldn't think of an explanation, and then murmured something about how it was good to be safe. He didn't seem like a bad guy, you know? I mean, maybe it was just how scared he was, but I couldn't imagine him really doing much harm to anyone or really anything. He was just some computer nerd. One that had done pretty good in life to afford that kind of living arrangement, but a computer nerd nonetheless. And if the mysterious man in the black sedan was sort of like the villain of this story, then maybe Adam was the victim. And if both things were true, then I figured it presented me with the perfect opportunity to make myself the hero. Maybe the phrasing of that makes me sound a little up my own ass or whatever, but I can promise you, fear and the relief of having extracted myself from a difficult situation were also very strong motivators here. I knew that I didn't have it in me to get all Mission Impossible and break in there after deactivating his cameras and hacking his computer and blah 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 Hollywood nonsense. I had to talk to the guy. I mean, really talk to him so we could figure out something together. And it wasn't something I planned before walking into his place. The urge just sort of took me then and there. And when I asked him again why the cameras were there, and I got another non-answer about security, I asked if the reason he wanted security was because he'd taken something that didn't belong to him. And the second I asked him, the friendliness dropped away again, only that time he looked frightened too. He asked who I was, like who I really was, because I guess he figured I worked for someone. In response, I literally said nobody, absolutely nobody, and I wanted to stay that way too. And then before he had a chance to really panic or anything, I told him exactly what happened with the guy in that black sedan, and how he seemed to know everything, how he was threatening my grandmother, and how he was looking for something that was D-FN or whatever the label was I wrote earlier. Now, I added that all he wanted me to do was report back on where I'd found it, and not to take it. And so whatever it was, he could just leave it someplace, tell me where, and then get the F out of town before the sedan man's goon showed up to collect it, it seemed. Now, because I was pretty damn sure they'd collect him along with it, and while that'd be rough on my conscience, it'd most likely be even worse for him. Adam agreed, and he actually got kind of emotional as he thanked me for telling him, but I was still very much in the mode of, we need to fix this crap, and now. And so I had to sort of hurry along the buddy-buddy moment and figure out what we were going to do and what was going on. Adam said he needed to copy what was on that drive, as he called it, and he also needed to erase and destroy all the computer stuff he had before leaving. And then including the time he needed to pack some stuff and arrange for some place else to stay, he figured he could be gone in about 12 hours, so 7 o'clock the next morning. And when he left, he'd leave that DF drive, that he called it, tucked behind the back of a picture frame hanging from a wall in his workspace. And that's where I could tell the guy that I'd found it, and since I couldn't do that until the next time I saw him, Adam would have plenty of time to get far, far away from Seattle. He tried to thank me again, but I wouldn't accept it, because it was now all on him to make sure our little deception wasn't uncovered. He needed to put that drive thing exactly where he'd said it'd be, and he needed to keep the hell away from the entire Pacific Northwest for all I cared. Because if they found out I'd helped him, then we'd both be screwed. Adam promised he'd disappear and that the men threatening my grandma would find what they were looking for, just not the only copy of it. And he only very cryptically reassured me that whatever was on that drive, its release couldn't be traced back to the agreement we'd made. I don't know if that was true or not at the time, but I guess me still breathing is a testament to Adam's honesty. At the time, though, nothing could have fully reassured me. And then after shaking his hand and wishing him luck, I went up to my part of the house, and in the morning, he was gone. I honestly thought dealing with the situation would be like a weight off my shoulders. After all, I'd done what was asked of me and located that little drive, So what else was there to worry about? Well, turns out a whole lot actually, because I still needed the guy in the sedan to buy my story and believe that I hadn't tipped Adam off before he vanished. At times I thought about vanishing myself because if this guy saw through my act, and he was probably going to do just that since he seemed to know everything anyway, then I was screwed. Even if they got the little drive thing they wanted, the guy would be pissed that I'd lied to him, and big successful criminals don't get that way by being nice and forgiving, do they? Well, a few days go by, and then lo and behold, I finish work one night to see that same black car sitting a few spaces down from my own. The back door opens up as I approach, and then I sit down in the back seat with that smiling jackass sitting next to me. I didn't have to act like I was sick of seeing him, and neither did I need to act nervous about the drive being where Adam said he'd leave it. So, all in all, I guess I was pretty convincing when I said they needed to make their move so that the drive would still be in the place I found it when they did. I remember saying something along the lines of, "I'm not having you guys blame me if he moves it. I did my part already, now leave me the hell alone." And the guy starts laughing that Bill Burr laugh of his heh heh heh, and then told me to calm down and that he'd make their move that night. He said I better go check in a hotel or something, that I should concoct a story about meeting up with a girl or something to that effect if anyone asks, because when the cops got involved, it'd be easier for me to just say I didn't see anything because I wasn't there. And the last thing I said, and I figured this'd be the last thing I ever said to the guy, was, "What about my money?" Now, don't think I was dumb enough to expect to get paid. I'm not that naive when it comes to the criminal underworld, but I also figured not asking would maybe raise suspicion somehow, so I did. Now, I'm sure this won't come as a surprise to any of you with fully functioning brains, but when I asked to be paid, the guy just laughed that heh 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 laugh of his and asked me why he'd pay me for something I just did for free. I took the guy's advice. I didn't want to make him think that I had a whole parallel plan going on, so I got the hotel room. And the next morning, when I made my way back to my car and drove home, one of the front doors had been smashed open, and Adam's apartment had been broken into as well. I called the cops, acted totally ignorant of everything, and just like the guy said, I was able to sort of say I didn't see anything because I was in a hotel with a girl that I met at work. And a uniformed cop later asked me why I hadn't brought the girl back to my place, but he seemed satisfied when I looked very sheepish and told him that we didn't want her husband finding out. And he gave me one hell of a judgmental look, but he didn't question anything further. I then had the landlord call me to ask me what the hell was going on, and she stopped by that same afternoon to take a look around. She seemed relieved that Adam's place was the only one targeted and that neither of us had been home when whoever it was broke in. After that, I thought that was pretty much it, that I'd somehow navigated dealing with some big-shot gangster without getting anyone hurt, and given enough time, the info, or whatever that Adam got away with, might get around to biting big fat Bill Burr on his freaking fat ass. But then came the night he and his boys showed up outside work again, in their big black sedan with its tinted windows. I didn't have to act or play pretend when I responded, I thought we were done. What else do you want from me?" But that time, Big Bill Burr didn't play pretend either. He didn't say, "Oh hey buddy, how's it going?" like he normally did. He just leaned out a little and then growled at me to get in the car before he had his guy drag me in. Now I knew that was the last time, I didn't, but that's what I told myself as I headed for the car. Just one more time, and then this whole goddamn nightmare is over. I thought it'd be the easiest one, with all the hard stuff having been and gone, and I even figured that the guy might even see it good to pay me now that he'd gotten what he'd wanted. But that's not what happened. After I climbed into the back, and one of Fat Bill Burr's goons closed the door behind me, I tried to basically go on the offensive. Any kind of nervousness, and I might as well just write "I tipped him off" on my forehead with a Sharpie. But even after saying, "What do you want now, dude? You said we were done," he completely shut me down by saying, "I know what you did." I had to keep going. I couldn't just quit right there and then, and so I pushed back saying, "Yeah, you do. I risked going to jail for you, maybe even got myself shot. But here you are, still bothering me." I didn't get past the "here you are" part before they cut me off again. Told me the only reason I was still alive was because he couldn't prove that I tipped off my roommate. He admitted to getting his hands on that drive, the one with a DF code on it. But as I suspected, he wanted his hands on Adam too, and he was angry that he slipped through his fingers. He asked me straight up if I'd tipped Adam off, and when I said no, he just rolled his eyes and called me a lying sack of crap. He then told me that for my information I should know that a body washed up on Alki Beach that very morning, and the cops thought it was my roommate, Adam. But Fat Bill Burr knew it wasn't. He said the reason the cops were so convinced it was Adam was because the body that they found had Adam's teeth. But it wasn't Adam, and Fat Bill Burr wanted me to know that the blood of that random homeless dude was on my hands and not his. And that was the only time I couldn't hold up my act anymore, and Bill Burr saw it. He then says, "Oh, you didn't think about that part, did you, kid? You didn't really take the time to find out who your little roommate was, huh?" I think I must have stammered or made some gesture because he seemed to know what I was going to say and anticipated it with, "You didn't need to know, so we didn't tell you. And even if you didn't tell him anything, you had one job to do, kid, and you messed it up." I remember telling the most unconvincing lie ever, saying I swear I didn't tell him. But all that guy said in response was, "Get out of my car," before reminding me once again not to slam his door. And that was the last I saw of Fat Bill Burr. I wasn't sure, and I'm still not 100% sure if this guy just sort of made all that stuff up as a way of making me feel guilty. Killing me was just more trouble, and I guess so was beating the crap out of me and giving me a real reason to go to the cops. But planning something like that in my head, a lie that I couldn't ever really confirm or disprove, I think that was supposed to be his parting shot. I'm happy to say that it didn't hit the target, not after a while anyway. I did a whole bunch of digging online and not a single body has been brought in from Alki all year, and the last being maybe 18 months previous to this. So Fat Bill Burr just had to have been lying, I think. Adam wasn't a bad guy. He might have done something dumb to have the mob on his ass like that, but I feel pretty confident that I'd done the right thing in warning him. I still feel that way, and I feel like I managed to navigate my ship through some very stormy waters, and somehow I managed to thread the needle in a way that saved both mine and Adam's asses. I feel pretty proud of myself sometimes, and it reminds me that taking the hard road and doing the right thing even when it's tough and scary is always the right way to go. But if I go the rest of my life never having to make tough choices like that again, I'll be a very happy man, and wherever Adam is these days, I hope he's okay, and that him and that Fat Bill Burr will never cross paths again. My name's Ryan, and I'm a grad student here in NYC, and I just managed to escape from the worst roommate I've ever had. I've been a fan of the show for a while now, and I've always kind of hoped that I'd never have a reason to contribute. I thought I could just listen to everyone else's creepy stories and never experience one of my own, but I guess that all changed when I met Kurt. I won't bore you with all the ins and outs of my housing situation in September last year, but let's just say that I needed a place to stay, and I needed it badly, and so I ended up going to view a single room in a shared apartment where my roomie would be a guy called Kurt. And Kurt wasn't there during the viewing, and I'm guessing that not only was that on purpose, but the landlord had the place scrubbed down to make it look like a regular, sane person lived there. After some couch surfing, I moved in on a 6-month contract starting October 1st of last year, and when I first met Kurt, I had absolutely no measure of what a creep he was going to be. He seemed like a quiet guy, into his old-school heavy metal with his long red hair and beard, and I honestly figured the only issue might be loud music or something like that. But pretty quickly, Kurt showed his character. And the first thing, and probably the least creepy thing relative to everything else, was his music. He played bass guitar, and at first me and him were pretty cool, so I asked him what band he was into after hearing him play one day. Now, he was into much more extreme stuff, but we talked about bands like Sabbath, Zeppelin, and my personal favorite, AC/DC, for a while, and it was cool to find some shared interests. But then, Kurt asked if I wanted to listen to something he wrote. Now, I responded saying, sure, go ahead, and Then he gets out his phone and starts playing this recording that's just his bass line and a drum track. It sounded pretty cool at first, like kind of creepy sounding, but still pretty good, and it kind of reminded me of Dawn Patrol by Megadeth, if you know the song. Some vocals kicked in, something kind of weird sounding I had to almost concentrate on to hear, but then I realized I wasn't hearing anyone singing. It sounded like a young woman talking, and she sounded very upset. I figured it was some kind of spoken word thing that he was working on with someone, but then, as the girl kept on talking, I realized that she was the survivor of a violent, carnal assault, and that she was recounting her experiences either in court or some kind of police tape. I said, "Dude, is it real?" And not like a sort of, "oh man, that's cool" kind of way, like, "what the F" kind of way. But Kurt just smiled and nodded and then started telling me about the exact crime it was from and things like that. I didn't say it to his face, but I thought using that audio was in very, very poor taste. But like I said, I didn't want to start an argument or cause any tension, and so I just palmed him off with something like, good art is always provocative, I guess, and then turned our talk onto something else. I only had to live with the guy, and I didn't think his weird taste in tunes meant that he was a serial killer or anything like that, but then I guess in that department, the thing he did next did him no favors. So I come home, I'm hungry, I open the fridge, and there's a bunch of what looks like organ meats in unlabeled jars, and the whole fridge stinks like vinegar. I felt like his stepdad or something going up to his room and asking him, like, "Hey buddy, what's that you left in the refrigerator there? It's awfully stinky for shared food storage, don't you think?" Now Kurt's just sitting there, blasted out of his skull and listening to the Melvins, and while yes, the Melvins rule, they don't pair well with pickled organ meats. Kurt apologized, told me they were sort of not-so-live models for an art project that he was working on, and said that he'd have them out of the fridge by the end of the week. Again, this wasn't so bad because while it wasn't nice looking at a shriveled-up pig's heart every time I grabbed some creamer, it wasn't affecting my quality of life or anything like that. But then, come the end of the week, the way Kurt chose to dispose of those organs pushed things to a whole other level. I woke up to take a leak at about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I had to be up at 6:30, so I'm pissed that I'm actually losing out on sleep. I hit the upstairs hallway in my boxers, breathing through my nose, all half asleep, and then, bam, this smell like sour death just punches me in the nose. I can hear frying coming from downstairs, and so I kind of knew what Kurt was doing before I saw it. But I went down anyway to make sure, and when I saw him frying those pickled organs in a goddamn pan, I said, "Dude, what the actual F are you doing right now?" Again, Kurt was all apologies like he always was. I promise that's not a Nirvana reference, but that time I was actually pissed off. Because once I went back up to bed, all I could smell was that sour death smell after it had gotten into my room. I couldn't go back to sleep at all. Like half because of the smell and half because of how mad I was that he'd try and cook that crap at 4 in the goddamn morning. It made him sick too, like he pretty much occupied the bathroom for the next 48 hours, meaning that I was relegated to peeing in bottles whenever he was camped out in there or whenever I was too scared to witness the aftermath. And that kind of knocked the pep out of him for a while, I suppose, because there was no more weird behavior out of Kurt, at least none I could see. Now the next thing happened maybe 2 or 3 weeks later when I came home to find a piece of meat hanging from some string he had tied to a cabinet handle, just sort of hanging there over the workspace. It didn't have a hook going through it like you might be imagining. It was sort of all wrapped up and tied in a string, but then the string had little tiny pieces of metal hooked on them, and so the meat looked like it had maybe 4 or 5 of these little metal tags on it. Each tag had weird little symbols on it that was different to the others. Now right away I'm thinking, Kurt, what the hell, man? And while I wanted to just toss it because it was a freaking dripping onto the counter, I just wrapped it up in plastic and put it in the fridge for him. Kurt comes home asking why I moved his meat and then asked me not to do it again because he was curing it. I asked him if he put any salt on it, like fully knowing that he didn't because I saw it, and when he said no, I said he needed to put a lot of salt on it if he wanted to cure it. Now he says, "Oh, okay, thanks." And then when I visit the kitchen, there it is again. No salt, no rub, no nothing. It's just there. I looked up how to cure meat, and what I read says you actually do gotta put it in the fridge while it's salted, and so at that point I'm thinking, okay, why the hell is he lying to me? I didn't want to argue with him. I like the quiet life, you know? And so instead of actually telling him what a disgusting creep he was being with his little hellraiser ornament, I very politely suggested that he keep his meat in his bedroom so he wasn't making the kitchen unsanitary. I also added that he was going to make it a safety issue. I had no choice but to contact the landlord. I wasn't a dick about it. It was more like, just work with me, dude. And since he wasn't a total a-hole, Kurt agreed to do just that and keep his meat in his room. The final straw was when the smell of rotten meat started seeping out from under his bedroom door, and then it wasn't long before I noticed an uptick of flies in our apartment. I got in touch with the landlord and asked him to perform some kind of apartment inspection so he could personally tell Kurt to stop just letting raw meat rot in his bedroom. He said he was busy for a couple of days and he would be over the first chance he got. But before then, I realized why the apartment was starting to smell worse and worse. It wasn't just seeping out from Kurt's door. He was hiding pieces of it around the apartment and letting it rot. He didn't get violent or yell at me when I confronted him about it. He gave me some evil-looking death stare, but he didn't say anything. He just slammed his bedroom door in my face, told me he didn't want to talk to me anymore, and at that I called the landlord again and told him not to bother coming over, or at least not on my behalf anyways, because I wanted out. I still had to pay him a month's rent at the start of this month, but I honestly thought it was worth it just to get away from Kurt in that apartment. I think he's a scumbag because I figured that he deliberately hid Kurt's character from me, who, by the way, was having his rent paid by his goddamn parents. I also used to wonder how he could afford to live there without any discernible source of income, but on the way out, the landlord mentioned it and it all suddenly made sense. The same landlord actually offered me an alternative place to stay, but there was no way in hell that I was about to trust him again. Not after he basically tricked me into living with a freak like Kurt. So let me tell you a story about how the best living situation I ever had turned into the worst living situation I ever had, and why there's never been a truer statement than never judge a book by its cover. So many moons ago now, I was looking for places to live in the city I'm at when I came across this pretty amazing apartment while going through the listings. The decor is awesome, it's all furnished, and it was maybe 15 minutes walk away from my job too, so literally perfect in almost every possible way. The only drawback was that it was a shared apartment. Now, I wasn't completely averse to living with someone, but I also knew that if there was a clash of personalities or something like that, then things could get pretty tense pretty quick. I'd previously lived with a guy, I'm a guy myself by the way, who could only be safely described on YouTube as a Neolithic savage, because if I go into any detail I'll probably get this video flagged if you actually read it. Now my point is, I knew that there was no point in me living in that place if the roomie was going to be difficult, and so I asked the landlord if I could meet him during the viewing, and that is how I met Todd. And Todd seemed like the dream roommate, honestly. He said he worked a lot and that he liked going to the gym and all of that in his spare time, but when he said that he'd be out of the apartment a lot, he wasn't kidding. I had the whole place to myself pretty much all day, every day, and the only times that I'd catch him chilling on the couch was when the game was on or when he had an injury or something like that. But even when he was home, I was stoked to have him around. He was a funny guy, he was clean, and he was chill too, so generally nice and easy to live with. But then came the night when everything changed. So the place had these 2 big bedrooms, these ensuite bathrooms, the works. Mine had a lock on the door too, but I didn't think that I'd need it, you know? Todd was a respectful and mature enough person to knock before entering and whatnot, so while I briefly considered using the lock, In the end, I was sort of thinking, why bother? Now anyways, I've been living there for just over a month with absolutely zero complaints all around, and the whole time, Todd was the ideal roomie. But then one night, I woke up needing to pee in the middle of the night like usual, and when I rolled over in bed, all I could see was this dark figure standing by the open doorway. And I freaking screamed so loud. I pretty much dived backwards off the bed, still screaming at the top of my lungs. Then by the time I grabbed the little folding knife I kept in the drawer, Todd had switched on the light. It was him, standing there in his underwear, but as weird as it might sound, he was just as surprised as I was. You see, Todd wasn't aware that he'd got up out of bed and walked into my bedroom because he'd been sleepwalking. Now, I said he probably should have just told me that once I'd moved in, but as it turned out, Todd hadn't done any sleepwalking for years. He said he used to do it a bunch when he was a kid, especially after he and his family moved house one time, and he figured it was probably the change of me moving in having triggered it or something, and said that he'd never had neglected to mention it if he'd been actively sleepwalking. I just wanted to get to sleep, honestly, so I just told him everything was fine and then went back to bed. Now, the next morning, I texted him to say basically, hey, sorry if that was weird, and I'm sorry about your condition coming back. I hope everything's okay. He told me we were good, but that maybe I should start locking my door in the future. I texted him back saying, sure thing, Captain Obvious, with maybe a laughing emoji, and then we were pals again. Now, from then on, I started locking my door at night, but it also wasn't like Todd wasn't doing anything about it. He said he went to some doctor who gave him a prescription for mild sleeping pills, and then for about a week or so, there was nothing. And then one night, I'm asleep in bed and I hear bang, 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 bang on my bedroom door. Now, once again, I'm just about jumping out of bed, but since Todd's knocking, I figured that he must be awake, so I asked him what's up. But I get zero response. I knew he must have been sleepwalking, so I called out to him to say, hey, wake up! All that kind of stuff, but again, I got no reply. I got up out of bed thinking, please don't make this a regular thing. And then when I opened up the door, there's Todd, buck naked, with his eyes all rolled up in their sockets so all I could see was the whites. I yelled something, slammed the door, and I think that's what woke him up, because the next thing I hear is him saying sorry and then running back to his room, still apologizing. I didn't follow him. I was mad, but what the hell could I do? The guy had some serious condition. It wasn't really his fault. And so I went back to sleep, went to work the next morning, and then called Todd at lunch to see how he was doing. He kept apologizing for waking me up, but I made it clear that as long as he was seeking help, then it was fine, because sooner or later the issue would be resolved, and that's aside from the fact that he couldn't really help it. He was super grateful, which was fine, because what choice did I have other than to work with him? And then again, that same sort of pattern played itself out. He went to the doctor, got more powerful sleeping pills, and even started hammering cardio at the gym after work to really tire himself out, you know? And there were another couple of weeks without incidents, and then once again, I woke up to Todd banging on my door in the middle of the night. I was just getting so tired of it by then. Almost every time we thought he'd handled it, it came back all over again. I started to suspect that he might not be sleepwalking, and that this was sort of like a weird way of trying to force me out. But I guess that was my paranoia and exhaustion talking because, well, I guess you'll soon see. And so he bangs on my door, wakes me up, and I start telling him to wake up and go back to bed. I put my head back down on the pillow, and he didn't knock again, but I also didn't hear him wake up or walk back to his room, so I got up, walked to the door, and started listening out for him. I figured that he might have maybe quickly walked off to another part of the house, but I also didn't want to just open my door up just in case he was standing there naked again. And so as I said, I listened, and what I heard sent a chill run through me. Todd was standing on the other side of the door, all right, and I knew that, because he was whispering something. I knew it was just his unconscious brain working, and that what he was saying probably didn't mean a thing, but just hearing him whispering on the other side of the door gave me the creeps, big time. I ended up waking him up by banging on the door back at him, and it sucked to hear him get scared and frightened, but at least it let me know that he was for real. I started questioning why him knocking on my door didn't wake him up, but me knocking back at him did. But I guess it was sort of like the outside stimulus throwing him off his sleep rhythm or something, because, like I said, I don't suspect him of faking this anymore. Now anyway, the final time it happened, before I started to consider just leaving at the end of that month, I recorded it to show Todd that next morning, and I guess just so he could see things from my perspective. Now he started hammering on my door again, and I tried waking him up by banging back, but for some reason that didn't work, and he started whispering again. Now I banged a second time, thinking another round of knocking back might do the trick, but all that did was make Todd start speaking louder, and it was then that I heard what he was saying for the first time, and it was almost like a prayer, but all kinds of jumbled. There was a lot of, "Our Heavenly Father, Lord, hallowed be thy name," but none of it actually went anywhere. It was all these phrases just sort of looping and spiraling until it sounded almost like nonsense talk, just like an edge of reason to it. Now he spoke in this weird voice too, like in the back of his throat almost, and I honestly think that it was one of the single creepiest things I've ever heard in my life. If I just woke up to that on the first night it happened, then I'd have been even more spooked than when Todd just appeared in my room. But since I kind of knew what was happening, I just went back to bed with a pillow wrapped around my head and tried to get some sleep. Now the next morning before I left for work, I showed him the video I took the previous night. It obviously didn't show much of him, but it captured all the creepy sounding nonsensical prayers that he recited in the back of his throat voice of his. I massively regret showing him that video, and I didn't do it to be mean or anything like that. I just needed him to see how serious it was and how bad he was disturbing my sleep. But oh man, the second he heard himself, it was like the stuffing had been knocked out of him. He went quiet. He said sorry, and then after telling him I'd see him later and we could talk about it after work, I figured that he'd head out the door like he usually did. Only he didn't. He just sat down at the kitchen table and he started to cry. Now later that day, I got a text from Todd saying that he was checking himself into some kind of medical facility and that he might not be back for a month or two, maybe more. I had the apartment all to myself for a while, which was nice in a way, but I was really worried about Todd. We kept in touch, and I'd ask him how his treatment was going and all of that, but he'd always give me one-word answers and then change the subject like he didn't want to talk about it. Now, I remember thinking it probably wasn't going well since he didn't want to talk about it much, and then after 2 months, Todd told me that he wouldn't be moving back to live with me, and he'd be sending someone over to gather his stuff. It was sad, knowing this super capable guy was having such trouble with a medical condition. I mean, it was creepy as hell being in the middle of all of that, and I think it'd have been a hell of a lot more frightening if I didn't know what was going on. But I did, and there was a rational explanation for it. It just sucked it was happening to him, and I lost his number after losing my phone, so these days I can't reach out to see how he's doing. So Todd, buddy, if you just so happen to be listening to this somehow, I hope you're doing much better, and I still think about you from time to time. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email at letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks